is up, everybody? This is the Sharp Angles podcast, the Thursday edition, the fantasy football edition of the Sharp Angles podcast, which we will continue to bring to you throughout the entire playoffs, talking about every single game, every single playoff round, 6 of them this weekend, and one of my favorite weekends of football. In fact, the weekend of football starts tonight with my Penn State Nittany Lions playing Notre Dame. Wish me luck, everybody. But there's only one person to talk about fantasy football with, especially here at Sharp Football Analysis, and that is the one, the only Rich Hribar, the Swami of Konami, which we have now added to his nameplate. That is how important it is. How you doing, Rich?
Yeah, man, what's going on? I appreciate yours too as well. We're here, man. It's the new year. I had to take the Christmas lights down, which I know you're a
I
fan
know.
of. I did add baby Deadpool back here though for you,
Yeah,
if you do
I like it.
appreciate that. But
Yep, I
yeah,
do.
it's a new year and we got the playoffs starting. It's fun time, man.
Yeah, I'm excited for the playoffs. I do think I still like the divisional round best. I still think that is my favorite one, but this is certainly a good one. And we're set up to have, let's say, a few good games. There are some of these games that I'm not sure how competitive they will be, how good they will be, but we are set up for some interesting games. And those games that we don't know if they'll be competitive, that's where the fun happens, right? That's where the magic happens here in Wild Card Weekend. So we're excited to definitely go through that and talk about that. First of all, though, I think we need to start where you started your worksheet previews this week, and that was with kind of betting trends and interesting kind of thoughts about Week 18 and some of what we've seen from Week 18. There are a lot of interesting ones in there. The one that I think stands out the most to me when thinking about what we expect to happen is that favorites of 7 or more are 20-3 straight up in Wild Card Weekend, which I mean that's a great way if you're trying to like judge game script and stuff like that for DFS or whatever. That's a really good place to start when we're talking about the Bills and the Ravens and stuff like that. But there's lots of other interesting nuggets in there. Which ones kind of stood out to you, maybe the most important this week?
Yeah, that's a good one if you're doing your initial like base, drafting and like the mitten or whatever you're doing on
Yeah.
for these teams that move on because big favorites have historically delivered, in this round. The Ravens fell under, I think 10. I think that moved a little
They
bit.
did,
I think
yeah.
it's 9.5, but historically double digit dogs are 10-1 since the NFL expanded. The only team that won as a double digit underdog in the wild card round was the Seahawks in the Beastquake game. Everyone remembers against the Saints. That was a really fun football game. I remember watching that, in Florida, visiting my mom and watching that game, thinking it was crazy. But so if you're setting those initial kind of lineups, that like teams like the Ravens and the Bills, like they're in really good spots and probably on a collision course to play in the second round as well. But if you're building around those teams, you feel confident that you're going to get an extra game out of those. If you're looking to kind of play the upset game, I mean, underdogs of 3 or fewer points have accounted for 21 of the 36 wins for underdogs in the opening round. With the Texans, the Rams, and the Commanders all kind of qualify for that right now. And then if you're looking for home short dogs, we've got the Texans and Rams that kind of fit that mold too. So overall, that's kind of some top-down stuff. I have all the information there. That's on the free side of everything. You can check that out. Also, since the NFL expanded to the 7 teams, which has basically been in the AFC, the head to Buffalo inaugural. But number 7 seeds have only won one game, and they're only 3-5 against the spread. It's been great that the NFL added this on for an extra game for marketing purposes, but these number 7 seeds have literally been kind of lambs of the slaughter so far.
Yeah, and it's funny because the 1-7 seed to win was the Packers last year, and we've got them in the same environment
Mm-hmm.
with Vegas giving them a shot with kind of what that number is in that game. And so it's funny that they were the first to do it, and now Vegas is like maybe they'll do it again. We'll talk about that game a little bit later. I'm really interested. I kind of want to mention, you mentioned the mitten, and I've been doing a lot of those drafts, and I've been having
Like saying the
having a
mitten.
great time. Mitten is how I've decided I'm going to say that. But how do you
Terrible
actually say
invention,
that
the
word?
mitten too, by the way. Like,
Hold on, what?
why would you just wear gloves?
I didn't. Of all the things I expected you to be anti, it was not mitten. You're anti. So apparently, as a follower of Konami, I also have to be anti mitten. That's what we've
These are
got
rules.
here.
These are rules.
It's the rules. But anyway, so in those contests, I think that your point about we're very likely to see Buffalo and Baltimore win, which means we're very likely to see those two teams play in the next round, right? If they both win, they have to play in the next round, I believe. So how the kind of
Yep.
reseeding works. But that actually is very interesting. If you decide to go very NFC heavy with one of those drafts, let's say you decide to draft 4 Eagles or 4 Lions, that gets a little harder, but 4 Vikings, which is very doable with what ADP has been. Then if you're looking for who am I going to bring back on the other side to make sure I have a full roster in the Super Bowl, should my NFC team make it to the Super Bowl, then the fact that you think those two teams are going to play each other and then one of them would get into the championship game means that if you can double up, maybe even triple up those two teams, that makes a really interesting situation. So thinking about that kind of playoff, we're thinking about kind of moving forward and making sure we have a full roster when we get into the later rounds, if we make it to the later rounds. Just an interesting thing to think about. We're going to talk about all the games here. Every single game has been written up in extensive detail by Rich over at sharpfootballanalysis.com. They're all part of our playoff fantasy package. Actually, the Vikings and Rams game is free, so you can go and check that out now and get a look at what he's doing. I mean, they're detailed write-ups, even more detailed than the regular season worksheets, which is saying something. Very interesting with game overviews. I'd highly recommend them. They're all part of our playoff fantasy package. As I said, you can get that fantasy playoff package for just this week for 75% off using promo code wildcard, all one word, wildcard. Or if you want to get on board for the entire playoffs, you can use promo code SHARP250 to get $250 off our full postseason package. So all of that's available. Head over to Sharp Football Analysis, check out those worksheets, read them. I guarantee you're going to learn a lot about this weekend and kind of what to expect. With that out of the way, let's get right to it with Chargers at Texans. Chargers -3. The total in this game is 42.5. You mentioned, the Bills always hosting the 7 seed. This is the Houston Texans Memorial Saturday playoff game that we get every single year, it seems like. And so, it's an interesting spot for the Texans. It's an interesting spot for the Chargers. I look at this game and it's weird to me, just kind of like from an overarching perspective, that I think I still have no idea. We're in the playoffs. Both of these teams are in the playoffs, and I still don't really know how good either of these teams are. I still have questions about how good both of them are, and it's weird. Houston skated by in a bad division. They did beat Buffalo. That is on the resume, so that's a point we need to make. The Chargers' only 2 wins against playoff teams came against the Broncos, who I liked the Broncos, obviously. I liked them coming into the season, but I would say they're one of the weaker playoff teams that we have. To be fair to the Chargers, they did beat the Bengals, they did beat the Falcons. Those are 2 teams that almost made the playoffs, so that record could look a little bit different. But either way, I look at these 2 teams and I just don't know which one of them's good. Is either of them good? Or we just kind of see a rock fight here? It's just a weird situation.
Yeah, and we could. It is one of the, obviously it's the lowest total for a reason. These teams have very Spider-Man meme-esque qualities too. They are 2 of the worst teams at running the ball with their running backs from a success rate stance. They, as a byproduct, they are consistently in third downs. I mean, the Chargers are 28th in the league instead of downs that reach third down. Houston's 27th. Houston's 30th in rate of downs that reach third and long. Only the Bears and Browns are worse this year, and the Chargers are 25th. They asked their quarterbacks to do a lot of lifting for kind of, a style of football that isn't really conducive to kind of playing ahead of the sticks. That now I will say about like Harbaugh in general, like his style of football, like while being kind of, what we would say like in the modern era, like maybe kind of boring, like it's tried and true, especially for the playoffs. The Chargers don't turn the ball over. Like the Chargers just want to play close games and not make mistakes. And that's kind of their style of football that they play. We have seen Houston now kind of, they will make a little bit of more mistakes, but both these teams have been really good of not allowing points off turnovers all year. So this is kind of a game where like they really match up and you say, like, yeah, they're, because when you want to bet an over, right, you're thinking about like getting a defensive touchdown or something like that to kind of like jumpstart that and ignite it. And you might not get that here. This is a game that's probably going to be played really close to the vest. The one hurdle I have like getting over is just the Houston side of the ball. It's really, they're just down on offense now to Joe Mixon and Nico Collins due to the amount of injuries they had. And they're asking those 2 guys to do a lot of lifting. And it's not that the Chargers have a ton of star power, but they are getting a lot more contributions from a wider range of guys than Houston is. And that's kind of the toughest thing to kind of navigate for saying like, all right, can Houston pull off this upset? Because I do think they can. Obviously, they're tight home dogs for a reason. I also think it's pretty fun to see the symmetry that CJ Stroud is going against Justin Herbert here because we're doing very similar things to CJ Stroud that we did early in Justin Herbert's career. Justin Herbert came out, had a really efficient rookie season, came back, had a good second season, and then the team started to deteriorate around him. Keenan Allen started to get hurt. Mike Williams started to get hurt. The offensive line fell apart when they built that up, and everyone started to kind of point. It's like, well, did we overrate Justin Herbert? And we know, anyone with eyeballs knew that this guy still had all the tools to be a good quarterback. And I still believe that is true with CJ Stroud. It's just that in year two, we came into this year so excited for CJ Stroud. He's going to have Stephon Diggs, Tank Dell, Nico Collins. Well, he threw 66 passes this year with all those guys on the field. The offensive line has been, a train wreck, especially the interior. He's taken a higher sack rate than he's taken this year. And we're doing kind of the same things to Stroud that we did with Herbert. So I'm excited to see what Stroud kind of brings to the table in this playoff game.
And I think your point about Stroud and kind of I guess we could call them excuses. To me, they're more reasons about why he's kind of
Right.
fallen back. We could also have questions about, I think we like Bobby Slowick, but we have questions about kind of what they're deciding to do on offense and things like that. But the offensive line is a major concern. And whether or not they can protect CJ Stroud in this matchup will go a long way in determining, who wins it, how big of a fantasy day can we get out of. Well, I don't even think, what is a good Stroud fantasy day really? Like that's kind of what we're
Yeah.
looking at. Maybe it hits in this situation because the Steelers and Ravens, as we saw, they were on a they were on Thursday night, right? Or they were on a short slate one time when they had the 18-16 game and it didn't work out. So maybe the Steelers Ravens just it doesn't bang for whatever reason. And then maybe he puts up a number that's good enough to get you there. But like we're not expecting a super high fantasy ceiling from him. But if we're talking about from a real perspective, real football perspective, who's going to win this game, whether or not they can protect CJ Stroud is going to be very important. The Chargers have a mid-tier pass rush, but they still have Khalil Mack, who is still really good. They still have Joey Bosa, who, has had moments, even though he can't stay healthy. His overall, numbers aren't great. They still have guys there that might be able to get after the quarterback. So I think when I'm looking at this game, that's where I'm starting. What are we going to see here? And then if they can protect him, Nico Collins is good enough to kind of lead a wide receiver room by himself. He is on that level. He's also kind of in a good matchup here. So maybe the Texans get there with Collins, get a better out of Joe Mixon than we've seen of recent weeks. This is a better matchup than they've had, and we get there. But I think it all starts with protecting Stroud.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do think that the running game here is going to be more successful than it was to close the year, like you kind of alluded to. I mean, since week 10, Joe Mixon, only 3.4 yards per carry. But then when you go under the hood and you look at who the Texans faced to close the year, and they faced run defenses that we came in objectively saying, like, Joe Mixon's probably not going to have a good game against the
Yeah.
Lions, the Titans, the Dolphins, the Chiefs, the Ravens. Like, those are all teams we kind of from if you read the worksheet, I guarantee you most of those games I wrote up, hey, this is not a great matchup for Joe Mixon. And then you look at the two kind of softer games that they had over that stretch, the Cowboys and the Jaguars. Mixon went over 100 yards in both those games. So the Chargers don't necessarily have like a deplorable run defense, but they have been softer against the run than their metrics kind of show because they have game scripts induced a lot of their performance. I mean, they faced the ninth fewest backfield runs in the NFL because of, just leading in games with their 25th in yards per carry, 18th in success rate, 28th in yards after contact per rush. So I do think that the run game for Houston is going to be more successful than we saw them kind of close the season with.
Yeah, I think that's fair. On the other side, with Herbert, I mean, I think we're kind of in a same situation with Stroud as Herbert, and we're talking about fantasy ceiling. We have gotten more of that running from Herbert late in the season, and so that has certainly helped. He's, seems healthy now. This is also a really good spot for Lad McConkey. We don't know. It doesn't seem like Josh Palmer is going to play. Quentin
Mm-hmm.
Johnson, sat out practice on Wednesday. We'll have to see. That seems like that was an illness. Normally players play through illness, especially in the playoffs, but we'll have to see what happens from him. But if you're talking about, that outside receiver position, that's going to be a tough day for those guys. But for Lad McConkey, this really sets up nicely for him against the Texans.
And we have seen the Chargers try to open it up under the context of opening up under Greg Roman and Jim Harbaugh. Since week 8, they've thrown the ball 1% over expectations. I know you say
I read
1%.
I read the excitement when you wrote that about 1%. And it's such a funny thing to be excited about. But I remember in season how often we talked about after the bye, it was after the bye week, and how often we
Mhm.
talked about, hey, these guys are like 2% over expected, which based on what they were like before the bye week was like 8% under or something. It was this massive switch. And so it's stuck. It's stuck. And I think that is an important thing to bring up.
Yeah, I mean, they were 29th in dropback rate before that point, and they went up to 20th. So it's like not seismic, but a definite improvement. But if you overlap that with Lad McConkey, because early in the season we kept writing up Lad McConkey from like a target share perspective. And we're like, look, he's getting the yards per out run and target share here, but you weren't getting the routes because they weren't dropping back. And as the drop back started to come for the Chargers, we then started to see the counting stats for Lad McConkey start to show up. That same sample that I just highlighted, he was only averaging 44.2 receiving yards per game. He cleared 52 receiving yards just one time before week 8. And then over the final 10 games, he averaged 88.4 yards per game. That was 5th in the NFL among wide receivers. The fewest amount of yards he had was those 52 yards in the game. Like, he became a really high floor player as the Chargers started to throw the football. And then he lines up now, if they're going to throw the football a little bit more, he has a really great matchup advantage in this Houston secondary that's really good on the outside, but have been a little bit softer to interior wide receivers. Only Jackson Smith and Jigba had more receiving yards than Lad McConkey from the slot, and that's where Houston is 20th in yards per target. They allowed the most touchdowns to slot receivers this season, 13. So it does set up for Lad McConkey to kind of build that momentum that he closed his rookie season with and carry it into the postseason.
Yeah, we do an anytime touchdown, first touchdown article here at the site, and all of those bets are, they're all long shots for a reason, right? But I think McConkey, I picked McConkey for this game. I wrote up this game. I picked McConkey for this game because it is one of those situations where this is where they allow the production. And so if we're going to get production, in the passing game, I think that's, especially with banged up Josh Palmer, especially with, we don't know how healthy Quentin Johnson. By the way, Quentin Johnson, man, did he get a hand transplant? Like, what was that last week? Do you see that catch he had down the sideline? He like stabbed at it with a hand and then pinned it against the chest. Good job, Quentin Johnson. I'm very happy for you. But on the Lad McConkey thing, Lad McConkey was one of my bigger misses of the offseason because I was worried about that target, those like target total, not share, but target total. And now that target total is there just aren't questions about him at this point. He's just good. He gets open, he catches passes. There aren't questions if this is the kind of target total that we're going to see. Speaking of target total, is this, Will Dissly, it kind of seemed like he was back in that number one tight end role. Any interest in him, especially on a short slate here?
Yeah, on a short slate, you can get involved here. We'll probably see that if you're playing like a DFS Saturday only and only the two gamer, we're probably going to see both Baltimore tight ends be the most popular tight ends on the slate. Still with Will Dissly, you kind of need that touchdown. Houston doesn't give up a lot of yards to tight ends. Will Dissly also doesn't go for usually a lot of yards, but they are 28th in touchdown rate to a lot of the tight ends. And that kind of has symmetry with, we talk about the slot receiver production. The middle of the field is where they've just been a little bit softer. And we'll probably talk about that in a few other spots where you have a clear overlap where a team is really good against outside wide receivers, but then slot receivers plus tight ends are kind of where they've been vulnerable. And that kind of is also lines up with this matchup. We'll probably see Petrie play in this game, though, which, and they are getting the linebacker back that got suspended. He came back last week. I forget his name.
Alshire,
Alshire
Aziz Alshire.
Trevor Lawrence.
Yeah.
So they are getting a little bit of help in the middle
Where
of the field back.
I love red zone, love Scott Hansen, but I every time I think about that play and how they treated it like the Kennedy assassination, like it was, it was
It's
wild
hard, man,
how,
and I get it. It's hard if you're a football player, man. Like
yeah, it's tough. He's running like, I'm not saying, like, I'm not even saying he should have got suspended, but like the way that we treated that guy, like,
yeah.
I don't know. It's
I mean, it's
very
football. Those things
strange.
are going to continue to happen, man. And how do
I don't
you,
know what to
and you
think.
can't take it for granted with these quarterbacks. What if the guy doesn't slide? It's tough, man. It's just a tough spot to be in as a football player. I mean, you're trained to say, like, it's a quarterback, don't go in hot. But I mean, it's football and you're literally nanosecond decision. Like, it happens.
I realized I made a Kennedy assassination reference, which happened, 20 years before you and I were born. How many more years do we have of that actually being a thing people think about? Like, will a 10-year-old ever make that reference? It's such an
Probably not.
important, like, when did they stop talking about the Lincoln assassination? Like, every time some people went to the theater in 1896, were they still talking about the Lincoln assassination? Like, that's, I don't know. These are the important questions we have to ask ourselves when we think
I'll
about history.
quiz my
One,
son on it later. I'm going to
yeah,
quiz my 20-year-old.
Yeah, I'm interested in knowing. One more here on the backfield. It looks like Gus Edwards is probably back this week. It looks like J.K. Dobbins is going to play. They have been both limited in practice, but I think we're going to get both of them. They did have interesting usage splits whenever both of them were healthy. Dobbins, instead of being like a 75% of the running back carries, was like 57%. And so that's something really to pay attention to here this week. I don't know, recently without Edwards, we've been getting a lot of usage out of him, but I am a little bit concerned about that usage this week. Do you kind of share that concern?
Yeah, and I don't really. I think between the two running backs here, I do prefer the Mixon side having more success than the Dobbins side. And we know the volume is probably going to be here on both sides because, again, this is what they do.
Yeah. Yeah.
Uh, but I do think with one Mixon not having to share really any touches, like this is probably a game where Mixon has maybe every backfield touch potentially. And we'll probably see Ogunbowale mix in a little bit and some long down and distance stuff, and maybe you get a touch for Damian Pierce or something. But Mixon's going to probably have 90% plus the backfield touches, not sharing any work. And I think the matchup's a little bit better for him. So I do side with the Mixon angle if you're looking to play a running back in this game.
Yeah, I'm with you there. All right, let's move on to Steelers at Ravens. Before we do that, though, I do want to mention we are live on YouTube. So if you're listening to this podcast, first of all, thank you. Continue doing that. We appreciate that. But if you'd like to participate, we are live on YouTube. Go to YouTube, search Sharp Football Analysis. You will find us there. Hit subscribe. You'll get notified when we go live. Like I said, we're going to do this throughout the playoffs. Warren's going to keep doing his live broadcast on Tuesdays and Fridays throughout the playoffs. And then throughout the offseason, we'll be around. We'll be talking about every minute, unimportant offseason storyline. We will see how angry we can make Rich when I ask him the most inane questions about offseason news. It's going to be a blast. So make sure you stick around. All right, Steelers at Ravens. Like we said, right, Ravens down to 9.5-point favorites now. They were 10 at one point, 43.5-point total. I think I'm fair to say that this is a very pro Lamar Jackson podcast. We are team Lamar Jackson. We love that guy. I thought he should have been the quarterback one drafted. I drafted him as the quarterback one this year. We are in love with Lamar Jackson, but we have to admit that the postseason struggle angle is real here. And it is interesting to think about going up against the Steelers defense that troubled him in the first meeting and then really didn't trouble him in the second meeting. So it's going to be interesting to see what Lamar Jackson we get here and if he can kind of like break out of those struggles that we've seen.
Yeah, I mean, this is the renewal of the rivalry again. These teams haven't played in the postseason since 2014, but these teams always typically play close to the vest. Even in that Week 16 game, which was kind of lopsided on the scoreboard. I mean, there was a span in the second quarter of that game where the Steelers were going in for a go-ahead touchdown, and Russell Wilson thought he could just basically, Nightcrawler bamped from the 5-yard line into the end zone and fumbled the ball. And then the Ravens went on a 96-yard touchdown drive and kind of never looked back in that game. And that was a game without George Pickens. So there is kind of an element here where if you factor in like, all right, what if we get like the Tomlin magic and Lamar has kind of his issues against the defense that's still very capable of causing some trouble. We saw what the Steelers did in that Week 18 game against the Bengals, right? Like they did all they could to slow down the Bengals, who had, Joe Burrow had thrown 3 or more passing touchdowns in 8 straight games coming into that game. And they put themselves in a position to win that game, especially if we don't get Zay Flowers in this game. I mean, Zay Flowers led the team in receiving yards, in the 2 matchups against the Steelers. He has been their man coverage kind of go-to guy this season. And there's a reason why the Ravens at one point in the season took the cheap cost of Deontay Johnson. And because the depth of this wide receiver room is not very good. Rashad Bateman's had a career year, and we love to see Rashad Bateman bounce back. But outside of Rashad Bateman now, they're probably going to be getting Nelson Agholor back, asking Kylan Wallace to play more snaps, playing 2 more tight end stuff. It's just not a room, though, if Zay Flowers is on the field, like you feel like tremendous about, right? And, you look at what the Ravens did against the Browns in that Week 18 game, and they played with their food a little bit, but Lamar Jackson also only completed 50% of his passes with Zay Flowers off the field. So there's an element here that's in play. It's like, all right, are we going to deal with this again? The Tomlin magic, the Lamar playoff stuff, like it's all kind of set up to be on the table again. But the one difference here I think that we have is the Derrick Henry factor, right? Like, this is a Ravens team that hasn't had a running back like this in the Lamar Jackson kind of tenure. And we saw last year they exited in a game where they gave the running backs 5 carries in that game against the Chiefs. That ain't going to happen here. The Steelers were able to script Derrick Henry out of that first game. He had no touches in the fourth quarter of that game, only 5 in the second half of that game. They played in week 16, Derrick Henry ran for 73 yards in the fourth quarter of that game. So if the Ravens are still in controlling game script, like we assume is 9.5-point favorites, you're going to see this be a Derrick Henry game, especially if there's no Zay Flowers.
Yeah, if I'm playing Saturday slate, I'm jamming in Derrick Henry and I'm figuring it out from there. I do think that is the question though. The question is, can they get Derrick Henry out of the game? And that seems, very simplistic, and it's more of a symptom than a cause of victory, right? But I do think ultimately, if you're wondering, all right, are the Ravens going to, come up short in the second half or whatever, if they're going to let the Steelers back into the game if they jump out into a lead, the fact that they have Derrick Henry kind of changes that math a little bit. And I don't know if you watched, if we're getting really into narrative street, I don't know if you watched the speech that Derrick Henry gave in the locker room after Week 18, but like was like, yeah, we're gonna do this, put it all aside, all of our playoff struggles. I haven't been to the title game, AFC title game in a while. Y'all have had your struggles. We're gonna put it all aside, and we're gonna do it. He looked like a guy that was ready to lead the offense, and John Harbaugh looked like he is happier than he had ever been in his entire life whenever Derrick Henry was giving that speech. So you can take that for what it's worth. I do think talking about this receiving core without Zay Flowers, because I mean Zay Flowers is, I would be shocked if he plays in this game based on what we've seen so far this week. We are recording this on Thursday morning. We'll see what happens, but I would be pretty surprised. I mentioned Bateman. Bateman certainly had the target share last week. I do think the two tight ends is where you want to talk about here. It was on a very limited sample. Zay Flowers ran a lot of routes, but both tight ends, we saw them both run more routes, and we also saw them get more targets without Zay Flowers. We also have seen that without Rashad Bateman, for Likely specifically. Likely has great splits without Rashad Bateman this year. And so I think when one of those two guys are out, that's really where we're going to see them lean in, especially getting Likely on the field more in this game, rather than looking, down, like you said, Nelson Aguilar and Devontae Walker, who I really like. And we'll see kind of if he can get some run. But like, they're not going to look to those guys. We're looking at these tight ends, I think, if we're trying to figure out who really gets the boost here outside of Bateman, with Zay Flowers out.
Yeah, and I do think Bateman, as an actual separator and route runner, I think he can look better against man coverage without Zay Flowers on the field, right? Like a lot of his man coverage splits just came because Zay Flowers got those targets, right? But I do think that Rashad Bateman is a separator and a guy that can get open against man coverage if the Steelers are going to play aggressively. But I, like you, do flock to kind of the, no pun intended here,
Hey, look at you.
the Ravens, but to the tight ends, because you already mentioned the Likely stuff. And in both games against the Steelers, the tight ends were active. In the first game, they had just under 100 yards receiving. In the second game, they both scored touchdowns. So I do believe that both of these guys are going to be the guys to look towards to kind of carry this thing, carry the passing game. And Andrews, like, since the start of the season, has been really good. The only thing that's been in the way of Mark Andrews has literally been playing time. He's
Participation. Yep.
Yeah, since week 5, only George Kittle and Trey McBride have more yards per route run than Mark Andrews. If you look at from week 5 on, he actually has only 57 fewer receiving yards than Travis Kelce. Travis Kelce has 52 more targets. The only thing that was in the way of Mark Andrews was he's played his lowest amount of dropbacks. Well, in week 18, when Zay Flowers left the game, it was up to 83%. If we can get him to like that 80% range, that 75% range, which is typically where we want a tight end to be, like 70% or higher, that's going to be a tremendous lift for a guy who still is Mark Andrews. Been a really effective player when he's been on the field. And then we get more run out for Likely. That just signals more of a boost for them. If you are backing any of these guys, though, you do have to have the Steelers do something in this game. And that's the hardest part of saying, like, the Steelers, basically, if you're trying to say, like, I want to bet the Steelers pull off an upset here, outside of all the narratives we laid out, we've got to find a way for the Steelers to score some points. I mean, this offense has been a disaster. And even in that week 16 game, the Ravens only completed 15 passes in that game. So, we need the Steelers. If you're betting like any of these player props on these Steelers, or you're looking for these guys to have a larger run out in DFS, we need the Steelers to do something in this game.
Yeah, like we have to have them push it because, like you said, And like we kind of mentioned with Henry, I assume they're going to be willing to just ride Derrick Henry in the second half if they're leading. And so you could certainly get 2 touchdowns on 4 catches from Mark Andrews, and it gets there right from a DFS perspective. But if you're talking about overs on yardage or catches or things like that, then yeah, that's where the concern is, especially since this Ravens defense that we were, I think, surprisingly, when we talked about them early in the season, we're like, well, I guess we have to attack this Ravens defense. And that has completely and utterly turned around over the second half of the season. Since they've moved Kyle Hamilton around, since they've gotten healthier, we have seen this defense, really turn around and be something special. And you pair that with what we've seen from Russell Wilson over the, last 5-6 games of the season. And that question you have of, can the Steelers push them? That's why the total is as low as it is in this game. That's why the spread is what it is, because we've seen them go opposite directions late in the season. And that's a big concern if you're supporting Pittsburgh here. Can they even move the ball enough for it to matter is kind of a big question.
Yeah, and over the past 5 weeks this season, only Dorian Thompson-Robinson, a favorite of the podcast, threw for fewer yards per pass attempt than Russell Wilson, and part of that was the
Not
sample
great.
without George Pickens. And, it's easy to look at the Steelers roster and say, when you remove George Pickens, you're like, "Oh my gosh, who could even have efficiency with these guys," right?
Yeah.
But even getting Pickens back the last 2 weeks against quality opponents has been a nightmare. I mean, Russell Wilson only threw for 5.5 yards per pass attempt on Christmas against the Chiefs, 4.8 yards per pass attempt in week 18 against the Bengals. And a large part of it is just like, Russ was running hot on the moon balls, as what Chris Collinsworth gets excited about, right? With Russell Wilson. And then he hasn't been connecting on the vertical shots. I mean, he's only completed 42% of his passes, 10 or more yards downfield over the past 5 games. It was 49% before his first 6 starts, which was third in the league over that stretch. He went to 20th. Even with Pickens returning last week, he's 7 of 22 on those throws the past 2 games. And he wasn't good in either of these games against the Ravens. 5.7 yards per pass attempt, 6.6 yards per pass attempt. So it's really hard to get excited about the Steeler offense that is doing the Arthur Smith stuff again, right? Like, even if the Steelers score, you're probably going to be like, is Ben Skoranek going to score a touchdown this game, or Michael Pruitt? But yeah,
Darnell
that's
Washington.
kind of yeah, Darnell. They threw a fade to Darnell Washington at the goal line last week. It's just like, this is the stuff we have to deal with, and we've dealt with it for all of Arthur Smith's tenure, like everywhere,
I
every
mean,
stop he's gone to.
speaking of, like, if when we think about who are the best players on this offense, you talked about George Pickens. When he's right, we have certainly have questions. We're not in the locker room, but we certainly have questions about kind of where George Pickens is from a mental state at this point in time. But he's their best player. He needs to have a big game. They need to get him going and get him involved when
Yeah.
he's out there. But we also look at the backfield and we look at, we saw that switch again last week where we thought we had finally seen Jalen Warren take on more of the work and they were kind of going to move into it. And he had an injury in the week. And so, you do have to think about that kind of stuff. But then we saw Najee Harris back again. And when why can't we just get the Jalen Warren usage? And I think, especially in this game, if the game script plays out like it should play out, like we expect it to play out, this game sets up a lot better for Jalen Warren getting usage in the passing game and stuff like that than it does for Najee Harris, who has been getting, when he gets touches, he can stack yards and stuff like that. But it hasn't been there from an efficiency standpoint for him for a long time now.
I'm very curious to see how this backfield gets handled in the offseason, because it reminds me very similar of the Austin Eckler, Melvin Gordon situation, where like both were kind of approaching contract, their contracts were ending at the same time, and the Chargers decided to go with Eckler and give him a larger role, let Melvin Gordon walk. That's how Jalen Warren feels to me. Like, he just hasn't gotten the opportunities to be a lead back or get like goal line carries, and you can't count on him to score a touchdown here. But in this individual matchup, I do think it sets up to be more of a Jalen Warren game. He had a season high 63% of the backfield touches when these teams last met. He had 92 yards against the Ravens, and the Ravens have been vulnerable to pass catching backs. They only allowed 3.9 yards per carry to Najee Harris in the 2 games, 27 carries for 109 yards. He only had a 29% success rate as a runner, but they are 26th in receiving points allowed per game to running backs, which sets up for Warren, who had 9 catches for 71 yards in the 2 games between these teams. So if you are in the Saturday only slate where it is a little bit more limited, you're basically saying, if you're going to play Warren on a site like DraftKings, not on a site like FanDuel where you get the full PPR run out, you're probably looking at it's like, all right, if I'm playing Jalen Warren, I just need basically Mixon or Dobbins to fail. And then you're in like an okay position.
Yeah, and you're just get 6 catches and and hope for the best there. You mentioned the free agent running back class, which is interesting because it has a few people in it that are like we we hope that these guys land in a better position. Obviously Jalen Warren is there. We have Khalil Herbert there. We have Rico Dowdle, although obviously he got more involved. But that Khalil Herbert one, that one, it sticks out to me. Elijah Mitchell is also, I believe, a free agent. I'm looking at the list. We have the full list over at sharpfootballanalysis.com. Go and check it out. But yeah, there are some names in there that you think to yourself, what if these guys actually got like a real role? But the reality is that they'll sign somewhere, we'll get excited, and then one of the 50 running backs available in this year's draft will get drafted there, and then
Yeah, that's the
we'll have
difference
to
between this
change our
year and
perspective.
last, right?
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
that's the one
exactly.
difference. Well, we had a better free agent class, although there'll be some interesting names. I mean, obviously we talked about Najee. I think Aaron Jones is a free agent again. You've got the Nick Chubb to see if a team takes a
Yeah.
shot at him or where he moves on to. But the actual draft class is significantly stronger than what we had a year ago.
And it's not just like stronger in that you have Ginty, who is obviously very very good. You don't even have to watch college football to know that guy is something special.
Yeah,
But
JT's
you
going
just
in the
have a
first
lot.
round. Everyone have cope with it already. Like let's
Yeah,
all
you
have
just need to
cope with
deal
that
with it.
early.
He is going in the first round, and you can box score scout that Penn State game all you would like to. If you watch that game, you saw exactly what makes that guy special, because he had no business gaining half the yards that he gained. He is something. He is something else. Like prime Alvin Kamara ability to just stay on his feet and break tackles. It is really something
He's
watching
got
that guy. I
that dreidel rushing style.
Yeah, just unbelievable, unbelievable. I could say that as somebody who was terrified every time he touched the ball against my Nittany Lions, even though it didn't work out. The fear was there. I can promise you that. All right, let's move on to the Sunday games. Broncos at Bills. The Bills are 8.5 point home favorites, 46.5 point total, which is a little higher than maybe I expected with that big spread. You kind of think, I don't know, but the Broncos offense has been good, and we know what Josh Allen can do. I guess the question, if we're looking for an overarching, question here, is can Denver punch up against legit elite competition? The answer for the year has mostly been no, although they should have had a win against a real Chiefs team. We're gonna take that week 18 game out of it, right? But they should have
Mm-hmm.
had a win against the real version of the Chiefs, and one of those again miraculously Chief saving their season kind of thing. They blocked a kick. That one is the one that I think upset me the most. Like when we're talking about them just getting out of things they have no business getting out of. That one was the one that got me. But other than that, we haven't really seen them punch up. Like you said, they're going to Buffalo for this game that Buffalo just hosts every year now since we've expanded the playoffs. And it's just I think the answer to that question is probably no, which affects how I'm going to view this game from like a game state perspective and from a DFS perspective.
Yeah, I mean, this feels like a definite spot where the Broncos are happy to be here, right? Like you're ahead
Yeah.
of your everything went ahead of schedule. You saw enough out of Bo Nix to feel confident coming into next year. You add more pieces, right? They were 8-0 this season as a favorite. They were 2-7 as an underdog. Like I said, if you want to asterisk, but we could just say like the week 18 game equaled out the earlier season game with the Chiefs, right? Like it's trade one for the other. This is not a team that's particularly played well against good competition and good quarterback play in general. We've seen, especially the back half of the year, as good as the top-down metrics the Broncos have defensively, they've allowed a lot of good games to good quarterbacks to close the season. I mean, Justin Herbert had that incredible second half against them in week 16. Joe Burrow threw for 400 yards against them. Lamar Jackson earlier in the season absolutely just dissected him for almost 15 yards per pass attempt in that game. And then, Jameis, who doesn't qualify with that group, but did light them up for almost 500 yards. So facing a good quarterback like Josh Allen, I think this is a tall task to ask this defense to go on the road and do. And then can they just match enough points? I mean, the Bills are one of the highest scoring offenses in the NFL. They are the highest scoring offense in the NFL at home this season. So can Denver kind of keep them? Because to win this game, Denver's going to have to keep them in like the low 20 range, right? Probably. And that's where we are. So that's just really tough to expect. We've also have the rookie quarterback thing, and this applies to Jaden Daniels too. I mean, rookie quarterbacks haven't been like a complete disaster in the opening playoff round, especially in their first like career playoff starts. They're 6-8 since the NFL expanded to 32 teams, but they are 3-6 on the road. We also seen rookie quarterbacks against Sean McDermott really struggle. First-year passers are 3-10 against him, and one of those wins was last week. Joe Milton or Drake May, whoever you want to split it. Joe Milton too, man. I know it was like a preseason climate, but we got to get this guy free. I need to see more Joe Milton play football, and he's
My
just going to be
favorite thing
buried.
about that play where he was running right and just lasered it across the middle of the field. That's the most Joe Milton play I've ever seen, because like you wouldn't advise anybody do what he did, but the fact that it's just an absolute cannon that he can do that, it's just, yeah, that's Joe Milton. Sometimes it'll work,
If anyone can
sometimes it
throw a
won't.
football in the mountains, it's Joe Milton.
It's wild. Yeah, I saw another stat. I forget who it was from, but like it was the hardest thrown, or well, he had the hardest thrown pass. Like I don't know if it was ever like in the last 10 years, something like that. Yeah, just really
The touchdown
incredible.
he had
Kind of.
called back where he was running left on the sideline and just threw like an absolute, I don't know if it even had arc. It just was a Nolan Ryan fastball, man. Like it was crazy. Like I just want to see more of him, but that doesn't pertain to this game. But they got the win in that game. They lost to a rookie quarterback in a game they basically were punting. But in Buffalo, those rookie quarterbacks are 2-9, 0-2 in the playoffs. Those passes are completed 58% of their passes, 9 touchdowns, 15 interceptions. So, I mean, it's tough. We haven't seen Bo Nix really punch up against quality defenses, too. Buffalo was number 1 in yards per pass attempt allowed at home this season. So, it's just a tough spot for those Broncos team to be in from a top-down stance.
I think that's the part of it where you're worried about Josh Allen and what the fantasy upside is here. Um, we've seen him have a lot of success in the wild card round throughout his career. We know that he can. We know that he can just get there. He can just score 3 rushing touchdowns, and then you're good. And that's how they put away the game. But you do have some worry about volume. The other thing you worry about here is if we want to use Allen because of how good he is and his kind of history. Who are we pairing him with? Are we just running him out there by himself? Are we doing the naked one? Are we doing Allen and James Cook to make sure that we pick up all of the touchdowns or the majority of the touchdowns? Like how are we playing that? Because you look at all of these other guys and Shakir, what's really the fantasy upside here, especially with everybody healthy. The other guys, Amari Cooper, it seems like he's going to play in this game. He was back on Wednesday, but we also have Coleman there and Mac Hollins, Dalton Kincaid. We haven't really seen that upside. I haven't seen him play enough. He also, as you mentioned in the worksheet, I'd recommend you go read some very weird kind of usage stuff with Dalton Kincaid this year. And so it's like, what do we do from a DFS perspective? I'm in on Allen, and I expect him to have a good game here. And I think, I don't know, he's going to be on a lot of rosters because he's Josh Allen. But like maybe people
Oh,
get a
yeah.
little scared of this Denver defense, and so maybe I get him a little lower than I otherwise would. What do I do with him though? Who do I put with him? It's a really it's a hard question to answer, I think.
Yeah, and we're looking, we did this on our Roto Grinder show last night, and we had this conversation about projected ownership and how it's looking in the middle of the week. And because Allen is still going to be popular, we're seeing a large amount of ownership still flock towards Khalil Shakir at his pricing, who has a good matchup. And just because of where he's priced and the surrounding players and what type of floor that he has, that's what we're seeing. It's going to see a lot of gamers click the button on him. I believe that this game will be played similarly to how Buffalo approached attacking Detroit. Denver is a very kind of similar defense. They play a lot of man coverage. They like to blitz a lot. Will they blitz? They shouldn't do this because, I've talked about, Josh Allen and his high touchdown rate against man coverage or zone coverage all season. But if they're going to come out and play a similar style that they played all year and say like, hey, none of these wide receivers are beating Patrick Surtain. Like we're going to line up and play man coverage. We're going to play aggressive on Josh Allen. Like the Detroit Lions did, I do think it's going to be a running back tight end game like it was in that game. That was the most yards the running backs and tight ends have had receiving in a game this season for any team in the NFL. So guys like James Cook, Ty Johnson, the combination Kincaid, Dawson, Knox, I do think those guys become viable as like cheaper end plays to get away from just chasing Shakir, who does have a good matchup because he won't face off against Patrick Surtain in those man coverage looks in the slot. But if he's going to be a 30 to 40% roster player who only has 3 end zone targets on the season, I want to look to pivot and find different avenues to stack Josh Allen. So pairing him with the running backs or taking a shot on Dalton Kincaid would be kind of an avenue I would kind of approach how I'm going to approach it if I'm playing Josh Allen teams.
Yeah, I think that that makes sense. The problem is that do you expect that running back to be James Cook? And if not,
Yeah.
are you taking a really, really low price just prayer that we get another kind of Ty Johnson game like that, right? And so that's the question. I think if I was doing it, I would do Allen and Cook. Hope that we see more receiving work, more backfield work centered around James Cook in the postseason than we did in the regular season as we really kind of ramp up using our best players, which James Cook is definitely their best option in the backfield. That's probably how I would do it. But there is also, again, that question of we haven't really seen that from Cook as much this year. He has been a lot more dependent on touchdowns. So there is that kind of added risk to that. On the other side, I mean, the the
And the
backfield
one
in
good thing we
Denver.
have, because I saw in the chat mention up, if you go to follow, Kevin Roth's my go-to weather guy, but every game is in the green for Roth this weekend. We have 0 weather concerns for any game.
I think that Sunday night game might have had rain, but it looks like that's going to clear up too. So that's yeah, that's promising for
Obviously,
sure.
we have
On
2
the other side,
indoor games, but everything looks good.
yeah, happy. We need some good weather here. Get some fantasy points.
And it
Um,
is the Northeast; it could change on a dime, I guess. But right now, it's looking good.
Speaking of weather, do you know that it's been sub 30s here in Central Texas? Look at that. We have I had to get out the jacket to go check on the pool pump yesterday. What a time! What a time to be alive here in Central Texas. Um, so on the other side, I do want to talk about the backfield in Denver because like it's just such a mess and we don't know what to think. Jaleel McLaughlin has been, as he's been healthy, he's been, getting more work. I are they going to activate Tyler Batty? I don't Beatty. He should pronounce it Batty. Tyler, please do that. But Tyler Beatty, are they going to do that? He's full in practice. Who knows? But am interested in if this game script goes the way it goes, so that we expect it to go, and if we see a lot of throwing from Denver in the second half, I do wonder if you really want to get degenerate, could we get a Javonte Williams PPR scam game? Remember that one he had where he
Yeah.
just ended up with a bunch of dump offs? Could he be like that kind of what we talked about Jalen Warren, especially at DraftKings? Could we see something like that? I don't know. It's at least interesting to think about. But I think from the backfield perspective, you had an interesting point about Marvin Mims and then maybe getting him more involved in kind of that position as they continue to get him more touches as we go.
Yeah, that's the one thing everyone ignores in the backfields, but that's that Marvin Mims is also playing in the backfield. Like they're not handing the ball off to him. They kind of are, but in their own way. I mean, if you look at this hot run that he's been on, closing the season where he's had his past 7 games, 70% of his targets have been at or behind the line of scrimmage. So he's been like really good after the catch. He has 7 targets out of the backfield, which is the most of all wide receivers over that span. So if you're saying like, all right, well, Buffalo they've allowed the most receiving points to running backs. Does Marvin Mims become an extension of that as well? Because he's not thought of as he's thought of as a wide receiver in the depth chart, but the way the Broncos are using him, he did catch that one deep one against the Bengals, which was nice to see. He was good at all that stuff in college. The Marvin Mims experience has been a very conundrum for 2 years in the NFL. I have to believe that Monday through Saturday behind closed doors or in team meetings or something, like Marvin Mims has something else going on because anytime he has the football or plays football, he's been electric both years in the NFL. So something else is preventing him from getting on the field and playing the amount of snaps we all believe his talent should carry him to. And remember, they traded a bunch of draft picks to go get Marvin Mims. So they clearly saw something in him too. But yeah, he'd be the kind of guy that you say like, all right, well, what if he is like the backfield that you talked the PPR scam for Javonte Williams? What if it's the PPR scam for Marvin Mims?
And if that's the case, he has the opportunity to create explosive plays because, as it turns out, when you give an explosive player opportunities, they create explosive plays. And again, like you said, there has to be a reason why we haven't seen this throughout Mims' career to this point until very recently. We did have runs like this, a couple times. I do think the usage has been more like concrete. It's been more trustworthy over the last few weeks. I believe in this a little bit more than I had, but it is a question. Why haven't we seen this before from Mims? I assume that Sean Payton is a very smart football person. I think like you said, there probably has to be a different reason, but ultimately they need explosive plays, and Marvin Mims delivers those. And so I'm hopeful they're going to continue that usage. All right, let's move on to Packers and Eagles. The Eagles are 4.5-point favorites, a 45.5-point total. This is an interesting situation because both of these defenses have been very good, especially late in the season. I mean, the Eagles have been the best defense over the second half of the season. Both teams are willing to run, play slow paced, but both teams also have efficient offenses. They're efficient with their possessions. They're 6th and 7th in points per drive. And so this is an interesting game of like good on good. We have good offenses, we have good defenses. I think people are projecting this to be slow paced because of the way that these teams work. But it could be interesting if like both teams score on their first two possessions. Could we get back to what we saw in week one, right? Could we have a really, could this game go way over and be the game that maybe you had to be involved in? I do think that that is on the table just because of how much talent we have on both of these offenses.
I mean, week one, I mean, these teams did shoot out. I mean, obviously, it was in Brazil on that weird field. But, we didn't really, both teams are kind of trying to find their footing. New offensive coordinator for the Eagles, adding Saquon Barkley, adding Josh Jacobs to the Packers, trying to find their way. That was a pretty weird game. There's like a ton of penalties in that game, too. Both these teams have kind of shifted and they've been more like defensive and run oriented. That's kind of like sapped the game total in this game. I do believe from the Eagles stance, I think that's largely in the range of outcomes more so than the Packers stance. And the game script can push the Packers there. But I think from an efficiency stance, I have a lot more faith in the Eagles kind of getting there. And the reason why is because I just go back to what the Eagles put in that Steelers game and what they did in that Steelers game and just showing that gear. Like, because the Eagles haven't been fully healthy on offense all year. Saquon Barkley, A.J. Brown, Devontae Smith, and Dallas Goedert have been on the field together for only 10% of their snaps this season. They're coming into this game with everybody. I do believe that they could end up throwing the football a little bit more here. Also, the Packers have been an excellent run defense. Obviously, you're not fading Saquon Barkley by any means. He's been really good even against the best run defenses he's faced over this course of the season, like the Ravens. But like the Packers have been really good against the run. So if there's an avenue for the Eagles to throw the football more here, I believe it does exist. I have a little more questions on the Packer side, not just from the matchup, but Jordan Love to this point has been kind of wishy-washy over the course of the entire season. He's been very volatile as a passer. You remove Christian Watson, like a big vertical element in this offense. He goes from 8.8 yards per pass attempt with Christian Watson on the field this season down to 7 yards per pass attempt with Christian Watson off the field. He only completed 50% of his passes in week one, and that was before the Eagles kind of found their way defensively. And they've been absolutely awesome since their week 5 bye. Can Josh Jacobs, be a guy that gets them ahead in this game? I think this game could be very similar to how they played the Vikings a couple weeks ago. And Josh Jacobs in that game ended up getting scripted out a little bit. So I do have a little bit more faith, I think, in the Eagles side. I think if you're an over better, then you should be more on the Eagles passing game side. Because I do believe the Eagles could come out and just throw the football more than we think they can.
Like you said, especially with everybody healthy, and we're assuming Jalen Hurts is going to be in this game. He was at practice on Wednesday. He looks on track to play. It is concussion protocol, so you can't take anything for granted. But obviously, this all changes if Hurts isn't there. But we're operating under the assumption Hurts will be there. I do, like you mentioned, their top 3 pass catchers just haven't been together a lot this year, and so there are questions about what we're going to see. Not from AJ Brown. AJ Brown's going to get his targets. His target share, even with those 2 guys on the field, is what it's going to be. He is the alpha wide receiver one. That's where we are. But we've seen this resurgence from Devonta Smith a little bit over the kind of last, let's say, 5 weeks or so. And so it's going to be interesting now with Goddard back, and they knocked some rust off of Goddard last week. What are we going to see from those 2 guys? Because when both have been healthy with AJ Brown, we have seen them kind of have very similar target shares, very similar, target rate per route. And that's not great for Devonta Smith for kind of what you would hope for him from a fantasy perspective.
Yeah, a little harder to kind of diagnose. I mean, if you're just looking at from a pure top-down matchup perspective and where the Packers have been kind of vulnerable, it would be towards tight ends, and you would say that's a run out for Dallas Goedert. Obviously, we only have the 1 game sample these teams played, but it was Devontae Smith, did catch 7 passes in that game versus 4 for Dallas Goedert. It's just a little bit more of like whack-a-mole-ish with those guys behind AJ Brown, and then on the other side, it's very much like the Packers, right? Like trying to diagnose which Packers wide receiver you want to like shoot on. Like, it's just a good luck situation. Because we know, at least removing Christian Watson, that Dontavian Wicks is going to play a lot. But I mean, none of these guys have really gotten there for fantasy over the back half of the season. Part of that's been due to some of the volume, but we've tried to martingale Jaden Reed a couple times in some very clean matchups for him, and he still hasn't gotten there. I still just think from like a touching the football perspective, Tucker Kraft and Jaden Reed are like the two best players the Packers have right now with Christian Watson off the field. Just, putting the ball in their hands. Like they can make a good play happen against anybody. We just haven't seen a lot of it for Jaden Reed over the back half of the year. Tucker Kraft is the best tight end with the football in his hands. A lot of people would question George Kittle, but this year he averaged the most yards per catch after
I have to
yards
say
after the catch.
that's over the last 2 years, actually.
Yeah.
Like you go back to last year, his rookie year. This isn't a fluky thing. Well,
Mm-hmm.
it's 2 years. He didn't catch a lot of passes or run a lot of routes his rookie year. It's a very small sample, but as NFL samples go, he has now done this for 2 years. He leads all tight ends in yards after catch per reception over the last 2 years. To me, this isn't fluky. He is either the
Yeah.
best or one of the best tight ends after the catch. And I think your point about Jaden Reed is important as well, because he's walking into what looks like a more difficult matchup. Everybody has a difficult matchup in this with this Eagles defense and the way that the secondary has been playing, but how good they've been against slot players since they've moved Cooper DeJean into the slot. By the way,
The exciting
I
lights.
could he could he pronounce his name Cooper DeJean? Like, wouldn't that be better? Like if he was DeJean? Like I don't like add that. Speaking of white wine, add that French connection to it. I don't know, but either way, since they've made that move, they've been better against slot. It's a tough space for Jaden Reed. But what we know about Jaden Reed and what we know about Tucker Kraft is they can create those big plays, and if we do see more throwing, they get more opportunities to do so. And
Yeah.
so that's why they're interesting. Dontavian Wicks, he's going to be out there. He gets open. He can sometimes catch touchdowns, but you're really at the mercy of, is he going to take advantage of his opportunities? Because so often this year when we've had this, he just hasn't taken advantage of those opportunities.
Yeah, I mean, if you're betting on the Eagles side, and definitely the passing game for the Eagles looks like it's going to be lightly owned. I say that on Thursday at noon. From that Sunday perspective, and maybe if Jalen Hurts gets officially cleared, we see some of that projected ownership move. But you have to anticipate that it's a high drop back game for the Packers, and it's not a great top down matchup. But we have seen the Eagles over the past several weeks, like in some of these games where like they force teams to just have a lot of dropbacks. They have given up some like counting stats to wide receivers. Obviously, like Jamison Crowder, Olamide Zacchaeus, scored touchdowns against them. We saw Terry McLaurin score a touchdown against them. They gave up 100 yards to Adam Thielen. So like, if we're just going to get dropbacks, I mean, one of these Packers wide receivers is probably going to do something as a run back. They're all fairly priced too. It's just if you're asking me right now to let's say which one, I don't really know. I just want to place my bets on Kraft and Reed because they're the guys with the football I have the most faith in making something happen.
Yeah, I'm there. Stoneman in the chat does mention, that the Eagles have been good against tight ends, which is 100% true.
Right.
And so it is just, you're trying
Yeah,
to
I mean, they've
find
been good against
what that is.
everything. Like good against the run, good
That's
against the tight ends.
yeah.
Like
As it turns out, they're just a really good defense. And so there we are. And so
they've been
maybe
good
we
on
just go
everybody.
under. Yeah, maybe this is just a
I
2014
mean, there's a
game, and
reason the Packers have
that's
a
kind of where we are.
20-point team total, even though they average 27 points per game.
Exactly. That's where we are. All right, 2 more games to get through here. I do want to mention before we do that, every single game was written up by Rich over at Sharp Football Analysis.com. It's all part of our postseason package. You can check that out. Lots of promos going on as we move here into the postseason. You can get 75% off Wild Card Week on our weekly subscription. Just use the promo code WILDCARD, all one word, WILDCARD. If you want to get on board for the entire rest of the playoffs, you can use promo code SHARP250. Again, all put together, SHARP250 for $250 off our full postseason. So make sure you take advantage of that and read Rich's write-ups, because we've talked about a lot. I mean, we're on the hour mark here. We have 2 more games to go. We've gone deep into these games, but there's even more in those worksheet previews. So make sure you check those out. All right, last game on Sunday, Commanders at Bucs. The Bucs are 3-point home favorites. A total, the highest of the entire slate, 50.5 points. Like I said, this is the highest total of the entire weekend, and I don't think either of us would really push back on that. Like, I have no reason to push back on this being the highest total.
Yeah, I mean, teams they're fourth and fifth in points per game this season. Bucks just under 30 per game. And when they've had Mike Evans, they've scored over 24 points per game in every game since he came back. Commanders just right behind them in terms of efficiency. The Commanders are in a very similar position as the Broncos. Now they're not going to Buffalo. That's the one pro that they have.
That
But
helps. It's a small help for them to not have to go to Buffalo and to get to play the Bucs. Just a little difference there, but you're
yep.
right, 100% where you're coming
Yeah,
from.
because you look at just what they took advantage of with a rookie quarterback that was efficient during the course of the season. They were 9-2 as a favorite, but they were 1-4 against playoff teams this season. But like they're ahead of schedule, and you feel good about everything as a first year regime, first year quarterback, all those things. It is a more winnable game, I will say. I know these teams did play all the way back in week 1, but that was Jaden Daniels' first career start. There's a lot of different pieces like in motion here in this game. I mean, obviously, if you were twisting my arm, I would obviously pick the Bucs. I think they just have a lot more matchup advantages in terms of where they have leverage. And then we just also too kind of have to question too, like the state of this Washington offense, as good as they've been. It's been kind of, weird how they've kind of closed these games to kind of end the year. Oh, since week 10, Jaden Daniels is 29th in the league in yards per pass attempt. He's thrown for fewer than 7 yards per pass attempt in 6 of his past 8 games. Now, for fantasy, you don't care as much because he's still absolutely crushing for fantasy, averaging 24 points per game because he's had positive touchdown regression and he's just running a ton. But from like an offensive efficiency stance, Washington as a whole has been a lot more volatile as an offense. They've needed some like late game runouts to kind of push some of their point totals. They've gone kind of dormant for stretches. Even in that last week, they just got Jay and Daniels the hell out of that game on Sunday. They weren't doing nothing in the first half of the game. He was taking hits from Micah Parsons. They were like, just get him out. And, Mariota fuels the comeback for that game. But what's really hurt, I think, Washington and Daniels from an efficiency stance is that their run game is dried up. And like this is a team that basically the whole crux of the season, and Cliff Kingsbury did this in Arizona. When the Arizona offenses under Cliff were at their best, they were playing complementary football. The run game's clicking, the pass game's playing off the run game. They're working off of each other. The Washington hasn't run the football over the past 8 weeks. Outside the Titans game, they just haven't run the football at all. And they've had some really good matchups to run the football and really struggled to run the football in those games. And I think that's what's kind of hurt a little bit of the efficiency. Now, Jaden Daniels, a lot of it, his rushing is scrambling. It's not necessarily RPO game. Over that span, I said he's number 1 in the NFL in scramble rate. He scrambled on over 10% of his dropbacks over that span. So that's how you're getting there still for fantasy. But you do, I think, worry from it if you're like a Washington backer or like you're looking for this game to go completely nuts, is that this offense has had a lot more volatility to it than the counting stats look like just looking at their points scored over the stretch 10 of the season.
You would also look at the Bucs defense getting healthier. If those outside corners are healthy, what are they able to do? Especially if we continue to see this our long running national nightmare of Terry McLaurin having the best season of his career, but us still thinking there's meat on the bone because what if he just moved around the formation some, right? That would be ideal. I do like looking at this. If those corners are healthy for Tampa Bay, this does set up, and Tampa Bay is able to push, and we'll get to the Tampa Bay offense here in a second. This game really does set up well for Zach Ertz and a healthy Austin Eckler if we expect him to kind of be in that role. Like this game sets up very well, I think, for those two guys specifically.
Yeah, I mean the Bucs are another one of these teams, especially when they've had they're the Jamel Dean and Zion McCollum available to play. They're third in yards per target allowed to outside receivers. They've been way weak in the middle of the field and to running backs out of the backfield, which again would set up for Austin Eckler. In the week 1 game, Washington running backs had 7 catches for 100 yards. It was the most receiving yards Brian Robinson had in a game this year too, if you kind of want to chase that. But I do think it'll be more Eckler in those situations, especially if they're chasing points. I think he just assumed more of that role as the season's kind of gone on. And then, Zach Ertz in his past 7 full games without injury has the same amount of targets as Terry McLaurin. This is the one thing about Cliff that drives everyone crazy. And you keep to see the coach interviews is that he's still doing the same Cliff BS, like because over the past 8 games, Terry McLaurin has led the Washington Commanders in targets 3 times. This is a roster that had Noah Brown.
The great Noah Brown has only been
Olamide
healthy for what, 2 of
Zacchaeus,
those games, something like that.
a 34-year-old Zach Ertz. Like this, it's criminal
Diami Brown,
activity.
say his name.
Diami Brown. Put it like you can't have Terry McLaurin not get targets on this roster. Like especially because Terry McLaurin's played really good football this year. You can't have him go stretches where he's not getting targets. And that was a problem when these teams played in the first matchup. And I don't remember that week 1 matchup, but all of the Buccaneers cornerbacks got hurt in that game except for Jamil Dean. And you know what Cliff did? Just lined up Terry McLaurin across from Jamil Dean the whole game. Like, didn't say like, hey, wow, the Buccaneers just had 3 cornerbacks come out of the game. What should we do? I don't know, man. Like, and that's the stuff that frustrates you with Cliff Kingsbury, man. Like, and that was a problem this matchup the first time, but it definitely sets up to be like an Eckler Ertz game. And Zacchaeus, I know you don't want me to go around, but I mean, Zacchaeus definitely has a lot of matchup signal in this game as well. So I think it's the short quick game.
For those, De'Ami Brown has been a point. If you're chasing De'Ami Brown, like I might do this weekend, you're chasing like a big play and hoping for, I don't know, maybe he throws a touchdown as he almost did, right? Like you're hoping for those kinds of things for De'Ami Brown. But if you're actually like, where are the targets going to be? I think you're right about Zacchaeus, and especially, Ertz and Eckler where we're looking. On the other side, I mean, there are lots of interesting things to talk about, but it looks like we're getting Marshawn Lattimore, Mike Evans again, and I'm here for it. I'm ready for the battle, the playoff version of this. Lattimore has had, for the most part, Evans' number, although the Lattimore, and that happened even earlier this season, but Lattimore's, missed a lot of time. He got back with Washington. We saw him really struggle with A.J. Brown in that game, picking up those pass interference penalties, which were the way the Eagles moved the ball with Kenny Pickett was, just pass interference penalties by Marshawn Lattimore. And so we don't know how healthy he is. We haven't really seen a ton of him. We don't know how comfortable he is. That does set up an interesting situation here. But I do wonder, could Lattimore be like, remember how in the NBA they used to have the enforcers?
The goon?
The goon. Guy come in and get
Bill
6
Lambier.
fouls. Yeah, he could be the Bill Lambier. Could he just come in and get Mike Evans kicked out of the game, and that'd be what they do?
I mean,
is that what?
It's non-zero.
It's a great plan. Dan Quinn, hit me up. I have a great idea.
Especially if he's not 100%. Listen, Marshawn, we know you're not 100%. We're going to address you. You got to go fight. You just got to go fight Mike Evans.
It's not a bad idea. Frankly, it's not a bad idea. I'm not against it. But yeah, it is an interesting spot for Evans because of that. And it's also interesting because you had a lot of stuff in the worksheet about the success that Baker Mayfield should have in this game throwing short against this defense, which obviously that doesn't fit as well with Evans, although Evans gets targeted everywhere, but that's not really what you think of with his game. And so there's a lot of interesting things about Evans here with this matchup. When you look at his price, when you look how much he costs, it is a bit of a like going out on a limb here with Evans.
I mean, they should want to do that because when you look at that stretch where Baker played without Evans and Godwin after they both got hurt in that Ravens game, he was at the bottom of the league throwing to wide receivers. So, I mean, tactically...
Cade Otton? Are we getting Cade Otton season back again?
Tactically, it makes a bunch of sense to just have Marshawn Lattimore come out and fight Mike Evans.
It might be the best idea I've ever had. Like I'm not even joking.
We're just galaxy braining this. But
would they get fined? How much would the fine be? Is ownership willing to pay it? Those are the questions Dan Quinn has to ask himself. Just go and do it.
Yeah, I mean it's worth it. But yeah, I mean Baker was really bad for that stretch. Throwing to wide receivers over that stretch where he didn't have Godwin. He had a league low 65 rating throwing to wide receivers over that stretch. Only completed 58% of his passes for 6 yards per pass attempt. 1 touchdown to a wide receiver over that stretch. So not the craziest idea I've ever heard you pitch.
I will have to say, Jalen McMillan hadn't broken out, and was hurt for a lot of that run. So it was the receiving core was there's a lot of Ryan Miller and Raheem Jarrett, right? In that sample. But
Trey Palmer was not pissed off over that stretch. But it should be a successful Baker Mayfield game in general because you look at the success that he had. He's basically, had the best year of his career under Liam Cohen, and everything was predicated on the short passing game with Liam Cohen. Obviously, that makes a lot of sense. Where he comes from. Under Sean McVay, Baker had his lowest time to throw this season. When he threw the ball within 2.5 seconds of the snap, he completed 78% of his passes, 27 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. When you got Baker to hold the football, and you got Baker to do some of the hero mode stuff he had, that's when you saw some of like the Baker stuff that got him out of other spots like Carolina and Cleveland. When he held the ball longer than 2.5 seconds, he only completed 63% of his passes, threw 13 interceptions on those plays. But when these teams played in week one, he averaged only 2.37 seconds per time to throw. When he got the ball out under 2.5 seconds in that game, he was 18 of 21, 9 yards per pass attempt and 4 touchdowns. And that was a bugaboo for Washington all season. They really struggled to defend the quick pass all season. They allowed a league high 7.7% touchdown rate when quarterbacks threw the ball in under 2.5 seconds. They were 20th in yards allowed per pass attempt. And when they got quarterbacks to hold the ball longer, because Dan Quinn is a good defensive head coach, they actually allowed the lowest touchdown rate in the NFL, and they were 11th in yards per pass attempt. So they need to find a way to kind of mask, get Baker to hold the football longer, make decisions. Also, Washington, I mean, both of these teams, the back half of the year had really great runs in terms of what they faced against opposing quarterbacks. I mean, you look at Washington, they closed the year against Will Levis, Jay Kaner, Spencer Rattler, Kenny Pickett coming in for Jalen Hurts, Michael Penix, and Trey Lance. And then you look at the same on the opposite side, Tampa Bay faced, since they're by, Tommy DeVito, Cooper Rush, Aiden O'Connell, Spencer Rattler also. But they also did limit Justin Herbert to under 200 yards and 5.9 yards per pass attempt. And then the resurgent Bryce Young, they held to 6.5 and 7.2 yards per pass attempt too. So a little bit of a better resume, but neither of these teams are very battle tested to close the year in terms of opposition.
I went to look this up to make sure I was right, talking about holding the ball. Baker Mayfield's scramble rate is much higher. I don't say much higher, but in like the scope of talking about 10% scramble rate from Jaden Daniels being like the highest in the league, his scramble rate went up by 1.5% off of his career average, which I think
He had
like
the most
that's
rushing
also,
yards of his career.
if he's holding the ball longer, he's not always going to throw it and get into those problems, which certainly helps him as well if he's able to use his legs and kind of scramble in those situations. So I think that's interesting. One more thing from this game is the backfield. This is, as long as the rug doesn't get pulled from us, this is Bucky Irving's backfield now. We are here. It's time to celebrate.
Yeah, I mean, with everything on the line last week, Bucky Irving had 21 of 23 backfield touches and played a season high 72% of the snaps. Since Rachaad White lost that fumble, which wasn't even really Rashad's White fault, it was like a really great play by Deron Bland. But since that happened, Sean Tucker's actually out-touched Rachaad White. He didn't even have a touch last week. So it's definitely the Bucky Irving show, and you couldn't ask for a better spot for Bucky Irving, who's been sensational since the Buccaneers have come back from bye. In his healthy games, he's averaged 22 touches, 136 yards per game. He's facing a Washington team we have just highlighted every week to target with running back play. 30th in success rate against running back runs, 30th in yards per carry. They're 31st in yards allowed before contact to running back runs. And he's an effective pass catcher. So we talked about that quick game from Baker Mayfield. We expect Bucky Irving to tack on receiving work too. So it is a sensational spot for Bucky Irving. If you are playing on the Saturday slot, he's going to be extremely owned. If you're in single entry stuff, he's going to probably be like 80% in single entry stuff. So or higher. So either lock button him or you try to find a way to pivot. He also can just fit into these Tampa Bay onslaughts over the back half of the year. Like all the guys have been getting there for the Buccaneers in these games. The running backs outside of the Detroit backfield, the Tampa Bay backfield, low key, they've been the most successful fantasy backfield. It's just the split kind of threw us off the scent a little bit over the course of the season. But outside of the Detroit backfield, Tampa Bay has been number 2 in productivity this year.
Yeah, I mean, I'm all in on Bucky Irving, and I do think like you could do like Irving Eckler, you could do Irving Ertz, and then try to get, because that is, Irving's going to be so popular. Maybe that's a lineup that you really take the shot on Hurts, Smith, Reed, and Brown, right? Like maybe that's the situation you get into on Sunday only. It's an interesting spot, but I mean, like, we don't need to tell you. Everybody thinks this is a great spot for Bucky Irving. So there we are. One more game here: Vikings at Rams. The Vikings 1-point road favorites, 47.5-point total. I think the big talking point coming into this game is what we saw from Sam Darnold in
Right.
that Sunday night game. One of his worst games of the season against the Lions defense that did get Alex Anzalone back, but prior to those, the 2 weeks prior to that had been just awful. Like in like one of those games was against Caleb Williams, and they had really struggled. Detroit won that game because their offense is really good. Those games because Detroit, their offense is really good. But yeah, they hadn't been slowing down teams. Darnold just didn't have it. We saw some drops from Justin Jefferson. It was a weird game, and so I guess moving forward into this matchup, the question is, do we expect more of that? As you know, has it finally turned into a pumpkin here for Sam Darnold, or do we expect more of the Sam Darnold we've seen, throughout the rest of the season?
I do believe we'll see the latter. Obviously, week 18 was a reminder and it was magnified for the stakes. And then that obviously the hype that built around that game and for Darnold to have like almost the seeing ghost games redux. Obviously everyone, it was all, the Discord, right? Like discourse on Twitter. It was all about him. But that wasn't the first time he did that this season. He had two horrible games this season already. The week 5 game in London against the Jets, he was a disaster. And then in Jacksonville, in week 10, he was an absolute disaster too in those games, and he bounced back. And I still think the bulk of what Sam Darnold has done this season still should give him the benefit of the doubt in a soda sense. I mean, in the context of giving Sam Darnold the benefit of the doubt as top 10. I don't think the Vikings are going to be a threat to actually win the Super Bowl, but I do think from having more offensive success in this game, they can have that. They had opportunities last week. Darnold didn't play good, and they didn't capitalize on those. They didn't, but they were good in this first matchup. The offense was particularly good. Darnold was good. And I think the matchup aligns itself better. One, he's just not going to get everything sent at him. Like you haven't seen the Rams play aggressive man coverage and send a lot of blitzes the entire season. Like just that hasn't been their identity. In this matchup, when these teams played earlier in the season, Darnold was really good. I mean, he was 18 of 25 in that game, just under 10 yards per pass attempt. That game was 21-20 with 12 minutes to go in that game. Rams closed in that game. But the big difference in that game is the Rams were really good on third downs in that game and the Vikings were bad. That was kind of the differentiator in that game. But we've talked about the Rams a few times. They rely on pressure to get on the quarterback. Darnold, and up until Sunday night, he had largely been good. The sample of the season is he had been good under pressure. He was really good under pressure against the Rams when they played earlier in the year. He was 7 of 10 under pressure in that game for 95 yards. But also the play action game is still where you have to factor in like Sam Darnold being effective in this particular matchup. He is second in the NFL behind Lamar Jackson in rating using play action. He uses it the 6th highest rate too. It's not just even a small sample. He threw for over 10 yards or pass attempt with the play action. That was 5th in the NFL, 10% touchdown rate, which was 2nd in the NFL. And against play action passes, the Rams are 23rd in yards or pass attempt, 24th in touchdown rate. When these teams played in week 8, Sam Darnold was 8 of 8 using play action, 13 yards or pass attempts with both of his touchdown passes. So I do think there's an avenue here for the Vikings offense to be a lot better than where we left off in week 18 and be more of the Vikings offense that we saw over the course of the season.
In that matchup, you brought up that previous matchup. The Rams obviously had a lot of success from a passing perspective. We have not seen that recently because they, haven't had to throw and things like that. I am interested. I thought a lot about that game, and I remember, if I'm remembering correctly, going into that game, there's a lot of uncertainty about whether Puka Nacua would even play in
Yep.
that
It was a
game.
Thursday night game.
It was a Thursday night game. It was a short week. Would he play? If he did play, how many routes would he run? Like there was a lot of uncertainty going into that game. And I kind of wonder because that performance is one of the, I guess, I don't want to say worst, but it's like one of the lower tier Vikings defensive performances we saw this year. And I do wonder if they just kind of got bamboozled on a short week, not knowing who was going to play and stuff like that. We know what Brian Flores is very creative. Maybe they just weren't able to do it. I am interested to see what this Rams passing game specifically, which obviously has Puka, who is great, obviously has Cooper, who is great. We haven't seen them throw a lot. We haven't seen Stafford go over 200 yards even a lot recently. I'm interested in what this Rams passing game looks like against this Vikings defense.
And they're going to have successful passing game. And they can. And we've seen the Rams punch up in weight class this season against good defenses too. So I do have a little bit of faith in them. I'm very curious to see the approach again, because in that first matchup, Brian Flores, they blitzed early in that game and Stafford absolutely killed the blitz and they dialed it way down. I mean, they only blitzed Stafford on 29% of his dropbacks. Their season rate was 39%. Stafford was 7 of 10 against the blitz, and they kind of called off the dogs a little bit. And Stafford had one of his better games of the year from an efficiency stance. But they're going to have to throw, right? Like I do believe the Vikings, I said, for all the reasons I laid out, like I do think the Vikings are going to have a lot more success throwing the football in this game than where we left off. So that in turn is going to make the Rams have to counterpunch in this game. So there's a little cat and mouse game here. I'm curious to see what Brian Flores does in terms of adjustments. But a lot of times, when we have these like great defenses against these great offenses, like it's tough not to get to just go in the weeds and say like they're going to lock these teams out, because we haven't really seen that be the case, especially in the course of this NFL season. Like the good offenses have kind of gotten over when we've had the matchups against good defenses.
Yeah, I think I will always be of the opinion. Well, I can't say always. Maybe things will change, but I believe in one of the reasons, as I keep talking about that Green Bay and Philadelphia game, specifically the Philadelphia side of it. I believe that good offense beats good defense, and that's kind of where we
Mm-hmm.
are. And so that
Yeah,
can
most
certainly
defensive
happen in
stats
this situation.
are offensive stats.
Exactly.
Like they really are.
But again, and this is a conversation we have all off
Yeah.
season about, we're talking about schedules and stuff like that.
Yeah.
When we're talking about the middle, 100%, you can get to the extremes and say,
Yes.
maybe not. Yeah, maybe not. And so, like, when you talk about like the Eagles defense, we're talking about like the best defense in the league. That's a little bit different. But yeah, when we're talking about like the Vikings defense, for sure, I think that's where we are. Looking
And
more at the
especially the
backfields
Rams, like,
here.
right? Because the Rams had
Yeah,
like a resurgence the back half of the year on defense, but like this is a defense that still allowed a lot of big games, you know?
yeah. And like they are so reliant on that one thing. Like they're so reliant on getting pressure. And even if they get pressure in this game, it might not matter. And so that's kind of where we are. The backfields are interesting here because we're kind of like we're in a different situation. Blake Corum's out for the season. We're in ultra workhorse Kyron Williams time. Like that's where we are. But on the other side with the Vikings, we've seen that split between Aaron Jones and Cam Akers become, Cam Akers has gotten, I think, more work as of late. And so it's an interesting situation we're kind of in with there. If you're trying to chase points here in this Vikings backfield, if you want to hammer, if you're playing the full 6-game slate, or if you're playing showdown, like it's a little bit tougher from those two guys. But again, were they saving Aaron Jones? He did have some of those injury issues. Are we going to see
Mm-hmm.
him kind of pop up and be more of a workhorse? I don't know. It's just a weird situation in that backfield. How are you reading it?
Yeah, and it's tough too because as much as we talk about Cam Akers, like when he's actually gotten some opportunities, made some plays too. It's not like, and that's always one of the things you have to worry about. It's one thing when you have like these splits and some guys getting some touches and he's not really doing anything. But Cam Akers has made some plays, especially the last couple of weeks. I mean, he had the long run against the Lions, which almost put them in a position to get really back into that game last week. They subsequently didn't get the fourth down, the 4th and goal. He had a touchdown the week before. He also had like the game clinching catch in that game. Remember when the Packers kind of got back in that game, they ran the play to get a new set of downs to Cam Akers, the play action pass to him. Like, so they've put him in spots to make plays. Aaron Jones has been a little bit banged up. Rams have been really good against the run. Again, like that, you're not going to use that as like a linchpin. The Vikings ran for a season of 64 yards when these teams played earlier in the year. Only Saquon Barkley was really the only guy to kind of torch the Rams this year, and he really kind of masked a lot of their top-down numbers, but they were really good against the run. We're expecting it to be a tight game, so there'll be some volume here for these guys. And Aaron Jones is the guy that can catch the ball out of the backfield too, so you can't really ignore him ever because of his ability, but it's not like a glowing spot for him.
Yeah, it's not perfect for sure. We also have to mention arbitrary Cam Akers narrative street
Oh,
playing the
yeah.
Rams. We got to bring up we in revenge game, hashtag revenge game time. Always have to talk about that. Well, I want to finish here with kind of the secondary Vikings pass catchers. I mean, Justin Jefferson, you're playing Justin Jefferson. You're going to try to force him in where you can because he's Justin Jefferson. What are you going to do? But this game doesn't seem to set up very well for Jordan Addison. And I think that from what I've kind of been reading in our Slack, you're pretty interested in TJ Hawkinson here in this spot.
I think from a DFS perspective, there's an avenue for Jordan Addison to like still hit big plays. But when these teams play, if we have a similar approach where the Rams, try to play similar defense to what they did in the first matchup, where they played too high shells on over 50% of the dropbacks, that has not been Jordan Addison's kind of game where he's earned targets. But on the flip side, that's 50%. That means you have another 50% of routes still to make a play. And Jordan Addison, if he's going to make a play, it's going to be off of that play action game that we saw. He actually leads the team in yards per route run and touchdowns off of play action this season. So he's been kind of their guy, even more so than Justin Jefferson when they're looking to set up those shot plays off the play action game. So if you're playing him in DFS, that's what you're looking for. I think if you're playing like a Jordan Addison player prop, you're probably looking more at anytime touchdown or longest catch versus just raw yardage or accounting stats. But I do believe that this game does set up, and the play action narrative does set up also really well for TJ Hawkinson in this individual matchup. He didn't play in the first matchup between these games, but the tight ends have been targeted just under 28% of the time against the Rams. It's the highest rate in the league because they play so much zone coverage. They want you to throw the ball over the middle of the field. So we haven't seen Hawkinson score a touchdown since he came back. He has been getting some targets. I mean, he has 18% of the team targets since he came back. Last week was his highest targeted game over the past 6 weeks. So I do think it does set up for opportunity here from a matchup stance to be in on Hawkinson, because he's underwhelmed, I think, because Addison's been good to close the year. But I do think this matchup sets up for him.
All right, that's it. And almost an hour and a half in here, talked about all 6 games. If you want even more information about all of these games, head over to Sharp Football Analysis, read Rich Hribar's worksheets. Again, those are part of the postseason package. You also get Warren Sharp's betting recommendations. We historically have done very well in the playoffs. We're coming off a great season, so you want to be involved in those as well. Get 75% off our weekly Wildcard Week package with promo code WILDCARD, all one word. $250 off our full postseason package, Sharp 250, again, all pushed together. Like I said at the top, we're going to keep doing this throughout the playoffs, as will Warren. Head over to YouTube, search Sharp Football Analysis, subscribe, get notified when we go live. Subscribe to us on your podcast player of choice. We appreciate all of the support. Enjoy the games this weekend, and Rich and I will be back to talk with you next week.